start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 1. Everyone has been to a museum of some sort: natural history, science, fine art, tourist traps, or halls of fame. The museum, which gets its name from the Greek word mouseion, meaning seat of the muses, originated as a place to discuss philosophy, mathematics, science, and politics. Mouseion. European museums of the 17th century developed into fancy houses devoted to collecting and categorizing noblemen's scientific curiosities, from fossilized teeth and bones to cultural oddities collected during the exploration of the Age of Enlightenment. 17. 21st century museums stem from these earlier methods of collecting, preserving, interpreting, and displaying objects. 2.1. Some cover an encyclopedic range while others became highly specialized. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 2. According to Native American belief systems, music is intimately connected to everyday life and, especially, to the spiritual lives of Native peoples. Sacred music is an essential part of ceremonies and other important traditional activities. Social music is performed for personal enjoyment, at social events such as community or family celebrations, or as accompaniment to social dances. The idea of music for art's sake is not part of traditional Native thinking. Although singing is sometimes used as a form of artistic expression, there was no such thing historically as attending a concert of Native American music. Indeed, in most Native languages no words mean music in the sense that we know the word today. Instead, music and singing are linked to their many functions in Native cultures. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 3. Art calls to us to stop, to pause, and step out of our own personal dramas, and experience someone else's life vicariously. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the word vicarious means experienced in the imagination through the feelings or actions of another person. Vicarious. Art takes us through the ups and downs on someone else's journey and invites us to feel the empathy that is so vital to good comforting. Well-told stories, be they told in a book, a movie, or a beautifully drawn landscape as seen through the eyes of the artist, teach us how to walk in someone else's shoes, to identify with someone else's challenges. When we allow ourselves to be moved by art, we are opening ourselves to being inspired and nurtured by a greater sense of humanity. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 4. In fashion you will always be working with other people and will need other people to help you realize your ideas. If you are a photographer you need to know good stylists, hair and makeup people, and models. A buyer needs to maintain good relationships with suppliers and trend information companies. Designers need a really wide network of people who can help them to realize their ideas, from pattern cutters and fabric suppliers to trendsetters and journalists. Everyone in fashion should have a good address book. In order to network you also need to consider your personal brand. Fashion is about appearances and selling your ideas, so you need to have a good public interface. Whether this is your business card or your blog, it needs to reflect your style and professional persona. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 5. As immigrants take on American culture and customs, they frequently shed their own. Some immigrants who are learning English attempt to abandon their native language in the hope of learning English more quickly. When the native language is abandoned by first-generation immigrants, second-generation immigrants often never learn their parents' native language and lose a part of their ethnic identity, adding to the potential for mental health issues. 1-2. Moreover, Immigrants who are discouraged from speaking their native language may experience a sense that their native language or culture is inferior. This is a potential problem given that their identity is already under assault by the stresses they face in adapting to American society. In addition, they may find themselves ostracized from their ethnic group, as fellow immigrants sometimes view abandoning one's native culture as an insult. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 6. Vsevolod Pudovkin was one of the greatest film directors of the golden age of Soviet cinema in the 1920s. Vsevolod Pudovkin 1920. He was no stranger to the trials and the adversities of history. He was called up, wounded and taken prisoner during the First World War before being drawn to the cinema. 1. He started working in Kuleshov's workshop in Moscow in 1920. 1920 Kuleshov. He developed theories on the art of silent films, and his ideas on editing, close-ups and slow motion, which he put into practice in several films, made him one of the undisputed pioneers of silent films. In the 1930s, subjected first to the new demands of sound films and then to the strict instructions of social realism, he gradually became an official filmmaker, and his later works are all too often mere illustrations of the regime's propaganda. 1930. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 7. For all the immensity of the Greek theatre, the focus of vision is clear. Every line of sight leads to the circular orchestra with the altar in the center. From their height on the hillside, all spectators had an unobstructed view of the area of action, but at the same time, few spectators were close enough to see such things as facial expressions. As a consequence, the size and focus encouraged masks to typify the kind of characters involved and the emotions they experienced. A further consequence was that, acoustically, the actors needed considerable projection to cast their voices to the back rows. Masks usually had large, somewhat circular mouth openings to magnify the sound of the actors' voices. The structure of the best amphitheaters permits the voice from within the circle to reach astonishing distances, even with fairly normal volume. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 8. Cultures that favor individualism and success-seeking behavior reward individuals who have high energetic charges. This kind of culture reinforces body phenomena such as holding one's head high, keeping one's chin up, and having a hard, prominent chest. These bodily behaviors require maintaining a relatively high energy level. Other cultures are more collective and support group-oriented behavior that would disapprove of an individual striving for personal prominence or being nonconforming. Such cultures often have a saying like "the head that sticks up gets chopped off." In this case, the head up, chin up, chest forward body is less likely to be found. In effect, culture normalizes body behaviors, making those behaviors seem invisible, meaning people take them for granted to the extent that they are not consciously noticed as long as they conform to the norm. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 9. English speakers tend to talk about time using horizontal spatial metaphors, e.g. the best is ahead of us, the worst is behind us, whereas Mandarin speakers have a vertical metaphor for time, e.g. the next month is the down month and the last month is the up month. Mandarin speakers talk about time vertically more often than English speakers do, so do Mandarin speakers think about time vertically more often than English speakers do? Imagine this simple experiment. I stand next to you, point to a spot in space directly in front of you, and tell you, this spot, here, is today. Where would you put yesterday? And where would you put tomorrow? When English speakers are asked to do this, they nearly always point horizontally. But Mandarin speakers often point vertically, about 7 or 8 times more often than do English speakers. 7-8. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 10. With sculptures and other works of art that are on public display, it is generally okay to include these in a photograph, but if the image is principally of a copyrighted sculpture, then the photographer may run into copyright issues with the sculptor. Also, with works of art that are on someone's private property, you definitely need permission to use a photograph of them, even if the sculpture or other artwork can be seen from the street. Inside buildings the rules are different. What may be a public space on the outside isn't inside. For example, you can photograph the exterior of St. Paul's Cathedral in London from almost any angle you like, but you won't be allowed to take photographs inside. The same applies to most museums and art galleries. Ultimately, if you can't provide the necessary paperwork, your images will be rejected or withdrawn. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 11. Experienced dancers will tell you that once you have rehearsed and practiced enough, a dance performance is less a physical challenge than a mental one. Later in the performance, when your body starts to break down, you may struggle to remain positive and motivated. The best way to tap into a last reserve of energy and get to the final curtain is to use your mind to encourage, cajole, and persuade your body to keep going in the face of fatigue. You can say, for example, "Keep at it. This is what I've worked so hard for. I will not give up. ... Or you might say, "I have rehearsed this many times and was able to keep up. I can certainly do it now. ... When you use your mind to make such a statement, your body listens, and you can dance your best until the curtain falls. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS Reading Power, 2020, Chapter 3 Art and Culture Exercise 12. One cannot study ancient Egyptian painting without feeling sorry for the painters, for in all the enormous amount of work done by them no one man was recognized, no one is now remembered. We know some of the names of great Egyptian architects which are written in the historical rolls, but no painter's name has been thus preserved. The fact that no greater progress was made is proof of the discouraging influences that must have been around these artists, for it is not possible that none of them had imagination or originality. There must have been some whose souls were filled with poetic visions. But of what use could imagination be to artists who were governed by the laws of a narrow priesthood, and restricted by a superstitious religion which even laid down rules for art? For these reasons we know something of Egyptian art and nothing of Egyptian artists. MTC. Good job.